When Napoleon invaded Russia, the Alter Rebbe sided with the Russian Czar, not so much because he appreciated the Tsar's policies, but because he feared what would happen if Napoleon would be victorious. If the Tsar prevails, it will continue to be difficult for the Jews materially, but spiritually they will prosper. If Napoleon prevails, by contrast, they will prosper materially, but falter spiritually. Not only did Alter Rebbe side with the Tsar, some of his Chassidim took on active roles and they became spies supporting the Russian war effort. One of these Chassidic spies was Moshe Meisels. He would pretend to be a wholesale merchant purveying goods to the French, while secretly listening to their military secrets and communicating them back to the Russians. Once, it became a little bit too obvious that he was listening to the French plans, and he aroused their suspicions. Now, in wartime, when a Jew was caught as a suspected spy, not too many questions were asked. He would be executed on the spot. But Moshe Meisels was a quick and persuasive talker, and so that verdict was not handed down immediately. There were enough people who believed his protests of innocence. There were, however, an equal number whose suspicions were aroused. As the argument between the two sides became heated, Napoleon himself happened to be passing by, and in a most swift maneuver, he put his hand over Moshe's heart as a primitive polygraph and yelled, "You are a spy," and he began to interrogate him. Moshe remained calm and answered the questions confidently. Napoleon was so impressed that he released him. Afterwards, Moshe said, "Now I know I have mastered the Alter Rebbe's teachings," for he would always emphasize that the mind must rule the heart, controlling its impulses. This week we begin the book of Leviticus and we read the Torah portion Vayikra. Most of the readings focus on karbonos, the offerings brought by the Jewish people in the sanctuary in the desert and afterwards in the temple in Jerusalem. The Torah introduces the subject with the following verse: when a man will offer of you a sacrifice to God of the animal, Odom ki yakriv mikem korban laHashem. Now proper grammar would have the verse read, when a man from among you offers. But the Chassidic masters teach us that this verse is specifically structured in this manner to teach that the real offering is of you, dependent on each person and no one else. The word karbon has its root in the word koroiv, meaning close. Bringing an offering means coming close to God. And the Torah teaches us that coming close to God is dependent on each individual. No external factors can stand in the way. Every person can come close to God. If he truly desires, he can reach the highest peaks. Also implied is that the offering comes of you, of the animal within the person himself. For each one of us has an animalistic side. This isn't necessarily something bad, for not all animals are negative and cruel. On the contrary, most animals are pleasant creatures that are not harmful to humans or other beasts. Even so, an animal is not considered a positive model for our divine service. For an animal acts only to fulfill its own instinctual drives. It thinks of nothing more than satisfying its own needs and achieving gratification. Its selfishness lies not in the desire to take advantage of others. It just doesn't think of others. It is concerned with how to get what it wants and needs. We each have a certain selfish, animal-like dimension to our personalities. There are times when we think only of ourselves and what we want. This is not necessarily bad, but it does not represent a developed state. One of the unique dimensions of a human being is that we can think and our brain can control our feelings and desires. When our behavior is dictated not by our intellect, but by our emotions, we are behaving animal-like. We are wasting our human potential. That is not why God brought us into being. He created us to make a change in the world, and that change begins with us. Instead of always taking, we should think of looking outward and giving. And this involves changing the animal in ourselves, bringing it closer to God. This is the spiritual service associated with bringing a sacrifice. In order to accomplish this, we must speak the language of the animal. It also has intelligence, but its language is self-pleasure. When it appreciates that giving can be more satisfying than receiving, and that the greatest happiness comes from attuning oneself to God's will, it will also act in that manner. This is why the best thing we can do is to continually expose ourselves to inspiring ideas and uplifting concepts. In this way, we will be motivated to look beyond our self-interest and see goals that benefit mankind as a whole. When describing Mashiach's coming, Maimonides states, goodness will flow abundantly, and all the delights will be as freely available as dust. Maimonides did not want to speak in similes. Here he uses one to communicate a fundamental concept. Yes, in the era of the redemption there will be abundant goodness, but man will regard it as dust, as something not at all alluring. That is not to say that he will not partake of that goodness. For everything that we need we will have. But the physical will not be important to us. Our focus will be heavenward and all else meaningless. We are limited beings with limited attention. When Mashiach comes, we will not lack anything, but our attention will be elsewhere. The depth and power of spiritual truth will capture and control our minds. That is what our thoughts will be engaged in, and that is where we will direct our energies. The beauty is in the exposure. It's not that we will struggle on where to focus our attention. For after being exposed to the knowledge of God that Mashiach will reveal, automatically we won't be interested in anything else. Our minds and hearts will be focused on spiritual awareness. Let us bring an offering to God by coming closer and sacrificing on the altar one more layer of our selfish side by exposing ourselves to just a few more minutes of God's light and wisdom. I wish you a good Shabbos.